Don't miss the rest of this powerful series. Subscribe now and witness the truth that mainstream media refuses to show. They said Africa could not build. They said African youth lacked skill, discipline, and vision. They said the dust would swallow every dream and that without foreign aid, the continent would collapse into silence. But they were wrong. In Burkina Faso, something extraordinary began. And it started not with machines, not with millions, but with one man handing his people a shovel, Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader who rose not to rule but to rebuild, made a choice that shook the foundation of global development. He looked at streets paved by foreign hands, contracts signed in foreign tongues, and buildings that bore no trace of local labor. And he said no more. In a country where over 70% of the population is under the age of 30, where degrees sit idle and dreams rot beneath foreign logos, he dared to ask a simple question. Why are our streets still paved by strangers while our sons remain jobless? The answer was silence. And from that silence, he built a movement. Traoré canceled contracts, defied consultants, and launched what would soon become a revolution. The Faso Mayabo Initiative, a project to pave the streets of Burkina Faso using only Burkinabé hands. No foreign firms, no imported materials, no borrowed leadership, just pride, labor, and legacy. The world laughed. They said it would fail, that African youth were untrained, that African cement was too weak, that African engineers lacked modern skills. But what they forgot is that Africa's greatest resource is not oil or gold. It is its people. And when you give them not slogans but responsibility, they rise. In dusty towns like Bobo Dioulasso and Kaya, young men and women began mixing sand and water, pressing bricks, laying stones with precision passed down through generations. Old masonry techniques returned. Grandmothers watched with pride. Children began walking slower, admiring the sidewalks their uncles had built. These were not just projects, they were poetry. Each brick a line in a national verse, each sidewalk a stanza of rebirth. No longer was development a foreign gift. It became a domestic promise. Ministers dropped pens and picked up trowels. Governors who once signed documents in air-conditioned offices now stood side by side with students laying concrete. The nation watched, then joined. What was once policy became people. What was once a plan became purpose. Market women swept the streets and at dawn, not because they were told, but because they were proud. A local radio host called it the People's Carpet, a new road not paved for presidents, but for pedestrians, for mothers and sons and elders who now saw themselves in every pattern etched into the earth. This was more than infrastructure. It was resurrection. This was not rebellion, it was reclaiming. And perhaps more than anything, this is what the outside world fears most. Not that Africa will rise in chaos, but that it will rise in competence. That it will no longer beg, but build. That its people will no longer wait, but walk on their own roads toward their own future. If this story stirs something in you, like this video and comment rise below, because this is only the beginning. They told us independence was granted the day the flags changed and the anthems played. But in Burkina Faso, the people have come to understand that true independence is not found in paper declarations, but in pavement. Not in ceremonies, but in sweat. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped into leadership, he did not hold a press conference filled with promises. He picked up a shovel and walked onto the broken grounds of a forgotten school. No gold sash, no army behind him, just the sound of dust and silence as he bent down, rolled up his sleeves, and began mixing cement. The cameras were not ready, but the people were watching. And in that moment, something shifted. The Sidewalk Initiative, once a policy on paper, became a movement in the marrow of the people. Traoré was not there to command from a palace. He stood in the heat of the day, laying bricks with citizens who had once believed power was always far, unreachable, untouchable. But here it was, in their hands. Ministers followed, governors followed, youth followed, and entire neighborhoods began to move. Not in protest, but in purpose. In Kaya, young women who had dropped out of school joined cooperatives to mold and press tiles. In Kudugu, elders taught teens techniques lost to time, skills once discarded in the flood of foreign contractors. And slowly, steadily, the streets began to change, not just in structure, but in spirit. Sidewalks appeared where only dust paths had existed. Designs inspired by tradition emerged, patterns from old fabric, resistance symbols carved into stone. Children played on the paths, vendors set up stalls, artists painted murals of women brickmakers and youth crews smiling beside their labor. And in every corner of the capital, something unmeasurable began to grow. Dignity. The people walked taller. They looked at the roads and said, "I did this. We did this." No foreign logo marked their work. No imported cranes shadowed their sweat. This was not development delivered. It was development discovered, grown from their own ground. A visiting journalist asked a young man mixing sand, "Would you rather be in Europe doing this for better pay?" The worker paused, then said, "Why would I leave when I am building my own country?" That one line echoed from radio shows to school blackboards. It became a slogan on shirts, a chant at construction sites, a mantra whispered by mothers. Because for the first time in years, development didn't mean foreign debt. It meant domestic hope. It meant employment. It meant transformation. Local toolmakers began receiving orders. Street food vendors flourished. Cooks, tailors, suppliers. Entire microeconomies bloomed around these crews. Even old warehouses reopened. Local banks started issuing microloans, not for foreign imports, but for shovels, gloves, boots made in Burkina Faso by Burkinabé hands. The sidewalk became a currency of confidence, and the nation began to learn a new equation, not GDP, but dignity per citizen. If this vision touches your heart, comment "We are building," and don't forget to like and subscribe, because in the next part, we reveal how this initiative didn't just change streets, it flipped the entire national economy on its head. When foreign companies dominated Africa's infrastructure, they didn't just bring machines, they brought terms, conditions, and control. A single road could cost millions, but that money didn't circulate in the villages it passed through. It went out, to Europe, to Asia, to the Middle East, leaving behind smooth pavement and shattered opportunity. The engineers were imported. The materials were shipped. The labor was flown in. And when the ribbon was cut, only the dust remained. But Ibrahim Traoré understood something deeper. He understood that the real wealth of a nation isn't counted in how fast a road is completed, but in who completes it. And so when he launched Faso Mayabo, he was not just laying bricks. He was redirecting the very flow of money. Instead of contracts with foreign firms, the government turned to its own people. Instead of purchasing cement from abroad, they bought from local factories. Once silent warehouses buzzed to life, small-scale mining cooperatives started delivering gravel and sand. Local cart owners transported supplies. Tool shops sold out of stock. Microloans were issued not for imports, but for boots, gloves, and protective gear made in country. A young man in Ouagadougou who once sat idle opened a small gear shop. "I never thought bricks could feed my family," he said. "Now they are feeding 6. This is what economists call circulation. But what the people call it is survival turned into strength. When the money stays, the people rise. Vendors around the site saw a 40% increase in sales. Food sellers fed crews of hungry workers. Tailors stitched uniforms. Youth formed cooperatives. Banks offered credit. Every paving stone laid by a Burkinabé hand became a paycheck, a lesson, a symbol. There were no fancy investors, no IMF conditions, no Chinese cranes humming in the background. Only the sound of trowels scraping dust and laughter rising under the African sun. And slowly something shifted in the markets. People no longer talked about the next election. They talked about the next section of road, about who would lay the next stone. Development had become democratic, owned by the community, not dictated from above. And every mistake wasn't failure, it was feedback. When a drainage channel cracked, they fixed it. When a wall needed reinforcement, they reinforced it. This wasn't just labor, it was learning. A midwife moved prenatal classes next to construction zones so pregnant women could see every day that their children's future was being built in real time. A school teacher started assigning cement budget math in class. Universities partnered with brickmakers to improve durability. Elders shared ancient techniques. Faith leaders preached the value of honest labor. This was no longer just construction, it was culture. It was pride turned into policy, dignity turned into design. And the world began to notice. Some analysts called it unsustainable, others called it symbolic. But Traoré said it clearly, a nation that cannot build its own roads cannot walk its own path. If that message resonates with you, type "Walk Our Path" in the comments. Like and share this story so more people see what true independence looks like. Because in the next part, we'll explore how this local project triggered regional inspiration and why leaders from across Africa are now quietly watching Burkina Faso with envy and hope. As the first kilometers of locally built sidewalks stretched across Ouagadougou, something else began to stretch: Africa's imagination. From Bamako to Niamey, from Lomé to Conakry, whispers turned into questions. How did they do it without foreign aid? Could we? Delegations began arriving. Not from Europe this time, but from neighboring countries. Not with contracts, but with notebooks. Burkinabé engineers, once ignored at home, now stood at blackboards explaining drainage angles, sand-cement ratios, and crowd-driven workflow models. What once looked like poverty now looked like proof. Proof that African minds could solve African problems without forcing blueprints. In Senegal, mayors asked their councils why imported contractors still paved city roads. In Mali, youth group ups shared videos of Traoré laying bricks and asked, "Where is our leader?" In Guinea, university students drafted a manifesto demanding a national sidewalk initiative. The ripple had become a wave. And Traoré, always one step ahead, embraced it, not with arrogance, but with strategy. He opened training camps, not for soldiers, but for street builders. He invited regional students to learn the Faso Mayabo model. He made every site a school, every wall a lesson. And across borders, something unprecedented began. A knowledge exchange not rooted in the West, but rooted in West Africa. Young men from Togo worked beside Burkinabé women in Bobo Dioulasso. Nigerian masons shared tools with Ivorian volunteers. Language barriers faded behind shared purpose. Flags waved together, not in politics, but in partnership. What had begun as local pride was turning into continental identity. Because when one African country succeeds with its own hands, others remember their own strength. But not everyone was pleased. Certain foreign contractors began pulling out, citing instability. Diplomats whispered about populism. Global lenders quietly shifted attention to other markets. But the people, ordinary, grounded people, knew what they were seeing. They saw power reclaimed. They saw aid replaced by ability. They saw something dangerous to the old order, African competence. And slowly, leaders who once ruled from marble offices began stepping outside. In Chad, a mayor laid a stone. In Togo, a minister swept a street. In Niger, a university announced it would ban the use of foreign engineering texts until local ones were developed. A movement was emerging, not led by slogans, but by sidewalks. And with every region that asked to learn, Traoré welcomed them. Not as followers, but as equals. He understood the secret. Burkina Faso could not carry Africa, but it could remind Africa to stand. If that message moves you, write "stand together" in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to see the rest of this rising story. Because in the next part, we uncover how this sidewalk movement has begun to rewrite the meaning of leadership, not just in Burkina Faso, but across the entire continent. Leadership, in much of the modern world, has become distant. Polished suits, rehearsed speeches, air-conditioned convoys. But in Burkina Faso, under the sun and under the weight of expectation, leadership has returned to something ancient: presence. Ibrahim Traoré did not become a symbol by branding himself. He became one by building beside his people. He understood what the history books often forget, that a true leader is not the one who commands from the hilltop, but the one who digs when the hands grow tired. And so he dug, not for the cameras, not for politics, but for principle. And in doing so, he redefined the office he holds. No longer was the presidency a place of distance. It became a station of service. Elders remembered Sankara. Youth began quoting Traoré. But more importantly, communities stopped waiting. They started moving. They realized leadership was no longer something to watch. It was something to copy. Across the provinces, mayors stopped outsourcing repairs. Teachers began organizing weekend build days with students. Religious leaders blessed new sidewalks as sacred acts of nation building. And from this wave, something deeper emerged: collective leadership. No one waited for top-down orders. No one hid behind excuses. The very act of building together created a new kind of accountability, one not enforced by law, but by loyalty to each other. If a wall cracked, the community rebuilt it. If tools broke, they pooled money to replace them. If someone slacked, neighbors called them in, not out. Pride had become the contract, and in that pride was protection. Communities once fractured by party lines, tribe, or faith now stood aligned by cement and sweat. An imam blessed a foundation while a Christian pastor laid the first stone. A traditional chief donated land for a youth-run brick factory. A teacher began ending morning roll call with, "What are you building today?" These weren't slogans. They were signs that the soul of the nation was shifting, but it didn't stop at symbolism. Real policy began to reflect this new vision. The government redirected funds from foreign consulting budgets to local training programs. University entrance exams began to include questions on practical infrastructure planning. National holidays began to feature youth labor honors. The Ministry of Development changed its motto to "By us, for us." And perhaps most powerfully of all, the people started seeing leadership not as something above them, but within them. The idea that a president can build sidewalks rewrote the expectations for every official. Now every leader is watched not for what they promise, but for what they do with their hands. This is how transformation works. Not with declarations, but with demonstrations. If this idea of leadership speaks to your soul, comment, "Lead by doing." Like and share so others can witness this new model of power. Because in the next part, we'll show how this physical rebuilding is beginning to transform national identity itself, what it means to be Burkinabé, and what that identity now stands for. The streets were changing, but something far more powerful was shifting beneath them. The very meaning of what it meant to be Burkinabé. For decades, identity had been a flag, a song, a distant memory from revolutionary days long gone. But now it was becoming something new, something living, something built brick by brick with calloused hands and sunburned shoulders. No longer was patriotism confined to Independence Day parades or campaign slogans. It now existed in the daily discipline of laying stone, in the quiet pride of pointing to a sidewalk and saying, "We did that." In marketplaces, greetings changed. Instead of "How are you?" people asked, "How is your section going?" Children began drawing street plans in school books. A grandmother began selling cold water only to those wearing work boots. "If you're building," she said, "you drink for free." Stories spread quickly. A boy who once failed his exams found purpose as a site supervisor. A girl who had never been to school became a tile designer whose patterns now decorate public parks. These weren't just anecdotes. They were transformations. Lives once labeled useless became central. The national self-image, once shaped by dependency and doubt, was being reshaped by movement, sweat, and unity. And in this process, old divisions began to fade. Urban versus rural, educated versus uneducated, rich versus poor. All these labels meant less when everyone stood on the same ground, building the same future. Even the way people dressed changed. The dusty beige of construction wear became a symbol of participation. Shoes caked in cement became status symbols. Social media profiles featured progress photos instead of fashion. There was a new kind of influencer now, the young woman leading a team of builders, the grandfather teaching brick techniques on video, the disabled youth organizing materials from a wheelchair. This wasn't a branding campaign, it was a shift in spirit, and it carried weight. When a Burkinabé child now asks, "What does it mean to be from here?" the answer is not a history lesson. It's a sidewalk under their feet. It's the sound of neighbors working together. It's the knowledge that development is not something to wait for. It is something to do. That kind of pride is not imported. It is forged. And Traoré understood that no matter how much is built, nothing will last unless the people see themselves in it. So he made sure every structure bore a local touch, a traditional symbol, a proverb carved into cement, a name chosen by the community. Roads were no longer named after foreign dignitaries. They were named after workers, mothers, elders who served. The street near a school was renamed after a woman who cooked for 40 workers every morning for free. The main boulevard was named not after a hero, but after the idea itself. Dignité. The people saw these names and saw themselves. And in that reflection, something long buried came alive. If this rebirth of identity touches you, write "We see ourselves" in the comments. Like and share so others can witness how dignity becomes a design. Because in the next part, we'll explore how this movement is now taking root in systems, education, health, energy, and how Burkina Faso is proving that when people believe, anything can be built. When a nation begins to believe in itself, that belief does not stay in cement. It spills into classrooms, clinics, power lines. It asks, if we can build sidewalks with our own hands, why not schools? Why not hospitals? Why not energy systems designed for us, by us? This question echoed through ministries and into villages. And soon the movement that began with bricks began touching every system in Burkina Faso. In education, the old colonial curriculums began to look absurd. Why teach European history for hours while local engineering knowledge went ignored? So the Ministry of Education launched a new initiative, Learn to Build. Now, primary school students visit construction sites as part of their science lessons. Teenagers design bus stops using math and physics. Vocational schools partner directly with sidewalk cooperatives to offer training and employment before graduation. One teacher proudly said, "For the first time, our students don't just study progress, they live it." In healthcare, clinics once built by foreign firms, empty, sterile, unaffordable, are now being redesigned by local architects who understand the rhythms of the community. A new maternal clinic in Kudugu features wide open air corridors, solar-powered water pumps, and birthing beds made from locally crafted wood. It was built in 4 months with zero foreign labor. Every delivery there feels like more than a birth. It is a declaration that we can care for our own. Energy, too, is transforming. Where once rural villages waited years for grid connection, now small teams are installing solar paths, solar tiles embedded in sidewalks, charging batteries during the day, and powering streetlights at night. A young electrician in Fadi Ngorma designed the first prototype. Today it lights an entire neighborhood. People used to sit in the dark waiting for the government. Now they walk on light they helped create. Even waste management, once ignored, has changed. Construction debris is recycled into park benches, planter boxes, playgrounds. Nothing is wasted because now everything has value, including the people once dismissed as unskilled or unimportant. This system-level transformation didn't require massive funding. It required belief. It required letting go of the myth that only outsiders could organize, plan, build. Traoré knew that systems are not computers. They are cultures. And if you build pride into the culture, the systems will serve. Bureaucrats who once saw their jobs as paper shuffling now visit sites weekly. Nurses who once worked in silence now host community health days outside clinics with murals of local midwives. Power is no longer invisible. It is present, it is human, and it is effective, all because one question was asked and answered by the people themselves. Why not us? If this system-wide transformation gives you hope, comment "Why not us" below. Like the video and subscribe, because in the next part, we'll reveal how this Burkinabé example is being studied quietly by world observers who once scoffed and now take notes. Once dismissed as idealism, Burkina Faso's model has now become a subject of quiet study among those who once turned their backs. In development think tanks in Brussels, policy circles in Washington, and academic panels in Paris, murmurs are growing. How did this small, landlocked nation, under sanctions, under pressure, under-resourced, build what wealthier states could not? The reports have begun to circulate, headlines in obscure newsletters. Burkina Faso's local model disrupts norms. Internal memos use phrases like unexpected resilience, grassroots velocity, non-aligned efficiency, but they still avoid saying the one thing that is now clear to the people. This is not a miracle. This is what happens when pride meets planning, when instead of outsourcing dignity, a nation invests in its own reflection. Delegations have begun to arrive. this time from the global south. Urban planners from Latin America, infrastructure teams from Southeast Asia, ministers from the Sahel. They do not come as donors, but as observers. They tour the brickyards. They walk the sidewalks. They speak with workers. They do not ask, how much did it cost? They ask, how did you convince the people? And the answer is always the same. We did not convince. We invited, we led, we joined. The model, they realize, is not technical. It is emotional, philosophical, political. A new country is emerging, one that does not wait for credibility from former colonizers. One that defines progress by the number of its people included, not the number of digits in a loan. But not all observers are friendly. Some visit in silence, taking notes to prevent replication. A Western ambassador was overheard saying, "If this catches on, we're done here." That fear is not unfounded, because Burkina Faso is proving something dangerous to the old order, that a people mobilized around purpose are more powerful than any grant, any policy, any army, and that a nation which trusts itself becomes immune to manipulation. Already, leaders in neighboring countries are facing pressure from their own people. Why are our roads still foreign built? Why can't we try our own hands? Proposals are shifting. Language is changing. Instead of development projects supported by foreign donors, they now read led by local communities. Even diaspora Africans are returning, not just for holidays, but for purpose. Architects from France, engineers from Canada, nurses from the US, all coming home to be part of something real. Not just symbolic return, but concrete contribution. Because when you see your homeland succeed without begging, something inside you says, I must return. This is how revolutions travel, not through violence, but through proof. And Burkina Faso has now become proof that belief, once planted in the hearts of people, grows like a forest that cannot be uprooted. If this growing global attention inspires you, write, "We are the proof" in the comments. Like this video, and subscribe so this story is seen across every border. Because in the final part, we bring it all together. The pride, the power, and the legacy Burkina Faso is now writing for the entire world to see. This is not the story of a sidewalk. It is the story of sovereignty rediscovered. Not in war, not in rebellion, but in the steady rhythm of hands mixing mortar, laying stone, dreaming beyond borders. What Burkina Faso has done is not just remarkable, it is revolutionary. And the revolution is quiet. There were no tanks, no fiery speeches, just a young leader who asked his people to build, and a nation that stood up and answered. They said Africa could not build, that its youth lacked direction, that its independence was symbolic. But now the sidewalks of Ouagadougou speak louder than their doubts. They said without foreign aid, nothing would move, but the workers moved faster. They said no one would trust local talent, but the talent trained itself. They said Burkinabé pride was not enough, but it became everything. What began as a simple plan to pave roads became a blueprint for an entirely new way of governing, of teaching, of healing, of living. A model where identity is not what you say, but what you do. Where citizenship is proven not by documents, but by contribution. Where leadership is measured not by distance, but by dust. And now the world watches. Some in silence, some in admiration, some in fear, but all with eyes open, because what's happening here cannot be unseen. A nation is rising not through rebellion, but through example. Not with debt, but with dignity. Not with slogans, but with sidewalks. And perhaps that is the greatest danger to the old order. Not that Africa will fail, but that it will succeed without permission. That it will stand on its own, build with its own, define itself with its own. And when that happens, everything changes. Aid becomes obsolete. Dependency becomes foolish. And those who once held power through control must now earn relevance through respect. Burkina Faso is not waiting to be saved. It is becoming the savior of its own story. And in doing so, it offers a gift to the continent and the world. A reminder that we do not need to become someone else to be powerful. We only need to become ourselves completely. If this message moved you, if this story stirred something in your spirit, then like this video, comment, "We are enough," and share this story. Let it reach those who still think Africa is waiting. Let them know we have already begun. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, Subscribe now, because this is not the end. It is the foundation. And what comes next is being written by the hands of a people who finally remember their strength. We are not asking for a place at the table. We are building our own, brick by brick, voice by voice, step by step. And the world will not be able to ignore us.